Yuji is probably one of the few main shonen protagonists that actually suffers in his own story. He doesn't just suffer, he fully has a mental breakdown seeing the deaths of people he loves and looks up to, such as his grandpa early on in the story, or Nanami and the supposed death of Nobara, or even losing his sensei Gojo to Kenjaku and being trapped in the prison realm. These are just a few instances, and there's so much more losses he takes throughout the story. It's like the story itself punishes Yuji for just being its main protagonist. Does Akutami hate his own main character? You would think he does, given the treatment Yuji faces throughout the story. It's been said since episode 1 that Yuji is a supremely gifted. He is superhuman in terms of physical prowess, and looking at how quickly he learned the Black Flash and instantly equaled the record of consecutive Black Flash attacks in a row, which was held by Nanami at the time, who is a grade 1 sorcerer. So you can tell Yuji has so much going for him. Him being the 1 in a million chance of being Sukuna's vessel and surviving, and with the amount of talent he has, the sky's the limit. He could be on the level of Toji, Gojo and Geto if he keeps going. And yet, despite having everything to potentially be the best, Yuji loses almost all the time. Whenever something good happens to Yuji, or whenever Yuji has a win, it's then immediately followed up with a loss. Look at Junpei in episode 10, where him and Yuji meet. Yuji actually makes a friend with Junpei, bonding over their love for movies. They became such good friends. Junpei invited him over to his house with his mom cooking them dinner. This was such a nice moment because we have seen Yuji in a continuous fight so far against cursed spirits, where we can clearly see he's overwhelmed, to the point where Gojo believes that the higher-ups in the Jujutsu world have tried to kill Yuji by sending him to these deadly missions. Plus the loss of his granddad as well. We never truly see Yuji in his most natural, calm self, just chilling. It's always action and business with Yuji, ever since he joined Tokyo Jujutsu High. So seeing him with Junpei just being his normal self, talking about movies which we know is his passion. He even does a Tom Hanks impression which we mentioned in our pop culture reference video. Do go check it out if you haven't already. But I feel we are seeing him at his happiest here in this moment. But then what does Akutami do? He has Junpei turned into a transfigured human thanks to his arch enemy Mahito, who was secretly controlling Junpei. This is what I mean. It doesn't even have to be Yuji having a major win against one of the special grade curses. Yuji can just have a simple moment such as him making a new friend in Junpei, but will then be psychologically crushed by Mahito as he kills the happy memory of Junpei by transforming him into a monster, which then ends up with the death of Junpei. Even in the Goodwill event arc, we had the fun moment of him reuniting with his friends Megumi and Nobara, who believed he was dead. But then as soon as the event starts, the Kyoto High students straight away go after Yuji and attempt to kill him. In the same arc, we have Yuji learning Black Flash and equaling the record for the most consecutive Black Flashes in a row, which is an amazing feat. But then that amazing moment from Yuji gets overshadowed by having Mahito steal Sukuna's fingers, which then leads to a horrific event that will change Yuji forever going forward in the story. But again, this follows the same pattern. When something good happens to Yuji, or if he has a happy moment, it is then followed up with struggle and loss. And it only gets worse for Yuji in the Shibuya incident arc, where he loses to Jozo in his first 1v1 fight against a proper threat, which then leads to Jogo feeding Yuji 10 fingers of Sukuna, which was all gathered by Mahito in the Goodwill event arc. And as we all know, Sukuna went on a mad rampage, killing so many people, which then leads to Yuji feeling like it's his fault that this massacre occurred. As we see in chapter 120, he describes himself as a murderer and that he should die all because of Sukuna. The whole Shibuya arc is a loss for Yuji, and to be fair, not just him but all the Jujutsu sorcerers, as they all aimed to save Gojo but failed in the end. Todo, in the middle of the arc, gives Yuji the pep talk to keep him fighting, which gets Yuji smiling again and ready to fight. But as the trend goes in this story, whenever Yuji is feeling happy or has a win, the story will take him down a couple of notches, with the death of Nanami and supposedly the death of Nobara from the hands of Mahito. And in the end of the arc, he didn't even end up killing Mahito. Kenjaku absorbed Mahito at the end of the arc, so Yuji didn't even get that satisfying kill. But I guess seeing Mahito run away like the coward he truly is in chapter 132 is more than enough for Yuji. So as we can see so far, the story up until this point in all the key moments has Yuji take a loss straight after he gets a win. However, in the Cunning Games arc, we saw a major reverse. Higuruma vs Yuji, where it's essentially a trial, and whoever wins the trial will end up winning the fight. Yuji loses at first in chapter 164, which then has Judgment take away all of his cursed energy, but then a retrial happens as Yuji figures out he never pleaded guilty, so he can go for a retrial, in where he does plead guilty to the mass murder in Shibuya October 31st, when it was actually Sukuna who did that crime. But he pleads guilty without a second's thought, and was able to overpower Higuruma and win the fight, gaining 100 points from him. After losing the first trial by lying, he ends up winning the overall fight by speaking the truth in the second trial, as technically it was his body that committed the crime, but it wasn't him in control of his body, as we know it was Sukuna, which in chapter 166, that fact was mentioned by Higuruma, but Yuji is still haunted by that event and will never forgive himself because of it. This fight he won after he lost the first round, which was the first trial, which is a polar opposite to what we have been seeing so far. I think Akutami wants to keep Yuji humble and grounded and not let his outrageous talent get the best of him. He created a quote-unquote Gary Stu of a character in Yuji, in that he can learn cursed energy very quickly, he can be a physical powerhouse against the cursed spirits even without any cursed energy. The fight between Higuruma and Yuji was fighting him without any cursed energy and just overwhelmed him with physical might. And the fact that he survived being Sukuna's vessel, which is a 1 in a million chance stated by Megumi in episode 1, I hate to use this example, but in the latest Disney Star Wars trilogy, which had the character Rey as the protagonist, just from the film Force Awakens alone, you can easily make the argument that she is a Mary Sue, which is the female version of calling a male character a Gary Stu. She learns the Force, knows how to fly the Millennium Falcon, and can go toe-to-toe against Kylo Ren. But the problem here is that she never truly has any challenges throughout the trilogy. She powers her way through everyone. She never truly struggled throughout this trilogy. We can clearly see she was born with ridiculous talent with the Force and her fighting abilities, which allows her to power through every enemy. And that's the difference in Jujutsu Kaisen. Yuji, despite having the same level of talent comparable to Rey with cursed energy, he loses a lot throughout the story, whereas Rey hardly ever lost. The fact that Yuji loses not just physically but mentally as well, despite having God-gifted talent, makes him so much more relatable. It's the same as Gojo. Gojo being the strongest sorcerer in the world and can literally do whatever he wants, because he's so damn powerful, he still can't live the way he wants. He still can't escape the hierarchy of the Jujutsu world despite being so strong. Akutami has created these overpowered monsters and managed to keep them relatable and grounded to the viewers by having them take major losses in their lives. In the Gojo's past arc, which involved Toji, Master Tengen and the Star Plasma vessel Riko, Gojo fails in that arc. He fails to protect Riko from Toji. He ends up killing Toji, but at the cost of both Riko's life and losing his best friend Geto to darkness. So even with Gojo, the trend of winning but still having a loss exists with him as well. That's why Yuji and Gojo connected with their audience whilst Rey didn't. She was so overpowered that it felt like she was more god than human. Whereas in Jujutsu Kaisen, the godly superhuman powers and strength in Yuji and Gojo, because of the amount of losses they take, feel more human than superhuman. Yuji's dream is to have a meaningful death. And with the current trend in the story of Yuji having a win, which is then followed up with a loss, I feel before Yuji does have his eventual death, he will have to do something insane, potentially killing Kenjaku or Sukuna. I don't know how he will end up killing Sukuna unless they both battle it out inside Sukuna's innate domain, as we saw when Yuji lost in the fight against Sukuna, which made him take a binding vow that allowed him to be alive. Something insane will happen. Yuji will do something crazy, which will then be followed up with his death, which stays consistent with the trend of win followed by a loss. However, If Yuji were to survive at the end of the story, he will have to break this curse. Just like how he broke the trend against Higuruma, where he lost the first trial but ended up winning the fight. If he were to survive at the end of the story, Yuji will have to take a massive loss. A loss even bigger than the psychological loss that Sukuna brings upon him when we see him mentally broken in chapter 120. I don't know what it will be specifically, but it will have to be the biggest loss of the story. I don't know, maybe having Megumi die when Sukuna takes control of his body. It's kind of foreshadowed in a way in chapter 143. Yuji has an internal monologue where he mentions as long as he is alive, Megumi will suffer. So the seed has been set from this chapter, so that could happen, but you get my point. A major loss will be followed up with Yuji taking a big win if he were to survive at the end of the story. But as we all know, Jujutsu Kaisen is not as straightforward as that, so we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this topic.